Today's video is brought to you by Displate. Displates are these really cool metal posters that are super easy to mount. They look fantastic and have more than 2 million artworks in their catalog, including officially licensed designs from things like Marvel, Star Wars, Warhammer, and you guessed it, Middle-earth. Stick around to the end of the video to hear about their ongoing sale and an exclusive discount code for my viewers. Welcome back everyone to another Rings of Power breakdown here on Nerd of the Rings. In today's episode, we see some really cool manipulation by Annatar, Celebrimbor's sanity start to fray, an Elendil moment that honestly made my nerd heart soar, and unfortunately one of the show's most frustrating tendencies rear its head once again. The episode opens on Arondir forest gumping his way through the woods when he comes across some orcs. Apparently Adar has some deserters, whom Arondir dispatches with his usual flair. He finds a map on one of them which we can see is of Eregion. We see the capital city of Ostin Ethil, which means Fortress of the Eldar, and the river Glanduin. At first I thought this map wouldn't do much good for navigating to Eregion since it's a pretty tight area displayed, but I think there may be instead some significance to the red markings. There appears to be an X toward the lower left area, along with some red lines in various spots. Perhaps the X is Adar's location and the red markings are notable locations where other orc groups will attack from, or points of focus for the upcoming siege, meaning this map is more of an attack plan than for finding the Elven Realm. We transition to Eregion where Celebrimbor is having no luck making the 9 rings for men. He wonders aloud at the failed metal, asking what pride these unliving things could possess to resist his hand. He chucks the metal to the side and we can see that there's been a lot of error in their trials, and that they don't have a great exterminator. We see Celebrimbor continue to lose his cool with the other smiths under him, and he even forgets Myrddania's name. Annatar comes in and gives the others a respite while he stays with Celebrimbor, and we really see the smith's sanity start to unravel here. He admits to forgetting simple things, pointing out he misplaced his creasing hammer. When Annatar is like, "Oh, you mean that one?" Lo and behold, the hammer is in the exact place where it noticeably was not a moment ago. Perhaps this is a side effect of Annatar's influence on Celebrimbor, or more likely, I think it may be Annatar causing this effect on Celebrimbor to drive him further to create the 9, thinking that only by succeeding can he be whole once again. Celebrimbor has clearly come a long way in his determination to make the 9, since his earlier determination not to make them. No doubt in large part because of the potential flaws of the 7, which he thinks he can fix with the 9. We find Celebrimbor basically says the rings are all that matters, and that he can't be bothered with his Lord of Eregion duties, which Annatar is happy to fulfill on his behalf. As Celebrimbor tells Annatar about the dwarves being late on their mithril delivery, we can see that the ring forging table has been reconfigured for the 9. We can see 4 spots on the left of frame, 1 at the center in front of Celebrimbor, leaving another 4 for the other side. As Annatar comes out to address a small crowd in the courtyard, we get our first frontal look at the Feanor statue, as we can see him holding a gem aloft. No doubt this is one of the 3 silmarils, the greatest achievement of elven craftsmanship to ever exist, and the very thing that launches the wars with Morgoth in the First Age. And as Annatar addresses the group, I couldn't help but notice this scene kind of falls into a pretty common situation we've seen throughout both seasons. Also seen in places like Numenor, where these big gatherings, announcements, or decisions consist of a couple dozen people in attendance. This isn't to say every scene like this needs a big crowd, but it's kind of become commonplace to the point where I think there's missed opportunities for some of these to be bigger pieces. It also goes hand in hand with these scenes usually using the same characters, as we see Myrddania being the only other character to speak in this scene. Rather than a smith bringing this up, I wonder if it would make more sense if a captain of the guard were to chime in here. Maybe I'm splitting hairs when it comes to this particular scene, but it's just something I've noticed the show falls into a lot that I think makes it feel a bit smaller than it could. Back to spotting the details though, we also see in the wide shot that begins the scene a better look at Feanor's hammer which he holds in his left hand. Of course, being a representation of the very hammer we've seen a few times with Celebrimbor already in the show. Turns out there's signs of trouble on the road to Eregion. most notably a scout's corpse with runes carved into his chest. A bit later, we find out that this carving, which is in a text unknown to the elves, says, "Where is he?" referring to Sauron himself. Annatar says to bury the body and to tell no one of this. Now, a quick aside as we talk about burying a dead elf, when an elf dies, their spirit travels west to Valinor, to a very specific and significant location. The spirits of dead immortals go to the halls of Mandos, the doomsmen of the Valar. There they wait to be re-embodied. Once that occurs, they can live out the remaining days of the world in the Blessed Realm. Myrddania and Annatar have a conversation about Celebrimbor, and we get to see more of Sauron's cunning and manipulation at work, as he assuages the elf's concerns and gets her to promise to keep anyone from disturbing Celebrimbor. In my opinion, this continues to be a strength of the show, as we just saw Annatar help Celebrimbor arrive at the conclusion that he needs solitude to work out the 9 rings, and now has manipulated Myrddania into seeing no one disturbs him, while also taking command of Eregion himself. And I gotta say, I love seeing things like this from Sauron, and I think it comes off as quite organic. Sauron comes to the top of the wall and we see some pillars of smoke in the distance from the orc camps before they make war. Annatar gives an oh-so-subtle smirk as his plan is presumably falling into place. As we saw back in episode 1, it was Sauron in disguise who told Adar that Sauron was in Eregion working on a new power, setting the orcs on this path to attack the Elven realm. Now, I've seen many folks wondering why he would want an orc attack to happen while they are creating the rings and not after, which I think is a pretty understandable question. My guess at this point is he plans to use this battle to take control over the orcs somehow. The timing does feel like a bit of a risk though, considering there are still rings left to forge, but we'll see how things shake out in the next couple of episodes. I'm sure it'll make for a more dramatic sequence having these things happen at the same time. Next we find Adar being super dramatic about eating with his fork as he's chatting with Galadriel at the dinner table. He references their last meeting when the roles were reversed, and we see, like that scene from last season, they're using a lot of Dutch angles in the filming here. They go back and forth about the influence Sauron has or doesn't over them, the promises he makes and the lies that he tells. Then Adar offers to team up with Galadriel to bring down Sauron. When Galadriel asks what help he could possibly offer, Adar brings out Morgoth's crown. Galadriel starts to say what she heard happened to it when Adar interrupts, saying Sauron refit it for himself. Now this is kind of a clever way to talk around something the show likely doesn't have the rights to. No doubt Galadriel is referring to the Silmarillion, where we are told of Morgoth's defeat. Then the sun rose, and the host of the Valar prevailed, and well nigh all the dragons were destroyed, and all the pits of Morgoth were broken and unroofed. And the might of the Valar descended into the deeps of the earth. There Morgoth stood at last at bay, and yet unvaliant. He fled into the deepest of his mines, and sued for peace and pardon, but his feet were hewn from under him, and he was hurled upon his face. Then he was bound with the chain Anganor, which he had worn aforetime, and his crown they beat into a collar for his neck, and his head was bowed upon his knees. And the 2 silmarils which remained to Morgoth were taken from his crown, and they shone unsullied beneath the sky. And Eonwe took them and guarded them. Thus an end was made of the power of Angband in the north, and the evil realm was brought to naught. And out of the deep prisons a multitude of slaves came forth beyond all hope into the light of day, and they looked upon a world that was changed. So we get this indirect reference to the Silmarillion version of events, but here instead the crown has passed to Sauron himself, which Adar used in episode 1 to kill him. Basically, Adar is saying Morgoth's crown has some special power which helped him temporarily kill Sauron earlier, and that if they also possess one of the Elven rings, maybe they can permanently kill Sauron with the crown. And I gotta admit, I'm pretty meh on this idea. Not because the actual crown is just iron in the books, but because it just kind of feels like a manufactured MacGuffin. Not quite to the sword, key, flood, Mount Doom level of season 1, but just a bit convenient for the sake of having something tangible to kill Sauron with. It also kind of makes you wonder why Sauron would want it on his head if it was a key to killing him. Adar says the fate of Eregion now rests on Galadriel's ability to put aside her pride. And if Adar had seen all of Season 1, he'd know that's a pretty tall order. He leaves Galadriel to think it over, and we head back to Numenor. We get a neat shot over the main dome of Armenelos, and can see the White Tree of Nimloth, ancestor of the White Trees of Gondor, seems to be doing alright in the courtyard. I'm very curious to see how it may factor into episodes ahead as Numenor gets to be a more dangerous place. And not to spoil anything for non-book readers, but let's just say the tree and Pharazon have a big moment in the story. We go inside where Elendil is on trial for the events of the previous episode where Kemen killed Valandil, with Pharazon charging him with high treason. While the punishment should be death, Pharazon offers him pardon if he renounces his crimes and acknowledges him as ruler of Numenor. Belzegar then asks Elendil if he renounces his crimes, which he does. Here we get Belzegar naming him Elendil, son of Amandil, which I believe is the first time we've heard Elendil's father's name in the show. What makes this all more meaningful is knowing the background of these characters. In the Silmarillion, we find that Amandil and Pharazon were great friends as young men. In the days of their youth together, Amandil had been dear to Pharazon, and though he was of the elf friends, he remained in his council until the coming of Sauron. So great was Amandil's reputation in Numenor that neither the king nor Sauron dared to lay hands on him. Eventually, he would be dismissed from the council and would withdraw to Romena, where he would gather the faithful in secret. Back to the proceedings, Elendil refuses to acknowledge Pharazon as king, saying Miriel is the true ruler and the only traitor there is Pharazon. And I gotta say, I love seeing this in Elendil. The guy is such a larger-than-life presence in the books. There's a reason Aragorn over 3,000 years later is still referred to as the heir of Elendil. And we'll get to this a bit more in another moment from this episode, but I am all about seeing a hero with an uncompromising moral compass to do and stand for what is right. And I think Elendil is one such character that should fit this to a T. We get a short exchange between Kemen and Pharazon, where the usurper tells his son that he has done quite enough. I was curious what Pharazon's reaction would be to him arresting Elendil and killing Valandil. Surely Pharazon would have been much better off attempting to win an important person like Elendil to his side, and his son has essentially destroyed any chance of that happening. Stupid Kemen. Belzegar brings out a book saying perhaps the faithful should die by the old traditions, showing an illustration where the Valar decide who lives in some kind of sea trial involving a big sea monster, as we can see from the illustration, but more on that later in the episode. Next, we get some quick flashes of Nori screaming, followed by her and Poppy held at knife point. A really quick shot of the Dark Wizard turning around, some rocks falling from the sky, possibly connected to the Dark Wizard as we see him in the following shot holding out his fist. Then another quick shot of Nori's eyes before the stranger opens his own, revealing this was a vision. Tom Bombadil and Gandalf, the stranger, chat about the secret fire, with Tom saying the secret fire whispers to them if they have ears to hear and can show them things. The secret fire, also known as the Flame Imperishable, is what Iluvatar uses to give life to beings in Tolkien's world. It is quite simply the power of creation. My prevailing theory on how the show is using the secret fire here is that they're alluding to Iluvatar himself, and that the One will sometimes give them these visions if they're open to receiving them. The stranger asks Tom about mastering the secret fire to defeat the darkness, to which Tom responds quite pointedly, "What does the secret fire need with you as a master?" And this is where I think a crucial lesson in the wizard's story will come from. What he must learn is that he is not meant to be a master of the secret fire, only Iluvatar is that, but he is meant to be a servant of Iluvatar himself. By the way, this is also likely pointing toward him being Gandalf, as one of Gandalf's famous lines to the Balrog is, "I am a servant of the secret fire." That being said, I love the idea of a character learning the importance of being a servant to something greater and not seeking power. It's a great Tolkienian lesson that also has some pretty great roots in his faith. Tom puts on his famous blue jacket and his hat and says, "Follow old Tom," and they're off to the stranger's next trial. We next see some horse riders, which made me stop and think, wait, weren't there people riding up to Tom's house last time we saw them? I guess maybe those people didn't actually know where Tom was, and they were just kind of looking around for him. It kind of made me wonder if maybe there was a scene cut between then and now. Back in Storville, Nori and Gund are chatting about the wandering ways of the Harfoots and the staying in one place of the Stoors. The thing that really threw me off here was the Gund's pronunciation of the word smile, here pronounced smeal. I was thrown off because I've only ever heard it pronounced as smile. I double-checked, and both the Rob Inglis and the Andy Serkis audiobooks pronounce it this way. On a further look, and shout out to Alan of the Prancing Pony podcast who pointed this out, smile is derived from the Old English word meaning burrow. This is the same word that Tolkien created an anglicized version to create the name Smeagol. However, diving less into Old English and more into the appendices, we find Tolkien in Appendix F talking about the relationship between the Hobbit language and that of Rohan, where he seems to indicate the smile pronunciation. Let me know what you guys think. Have you ever heard it pronounced smeal, or do you use smile? Oh, and Poppy and Hairband kiss for anyone interested in that. And the Harfoots are gonna fight for their friends or something. Back with Tom and Wizard Dude, and we get a ton of leafless trees. Tom says when the vision of his heart is single to the service of the secret fire, his true staff will be found. Stranger, however, has had his Luke Empire Strikes Back vision and wants to go help his friends, so he's placed in a tricky spot of pursuing his destiny or saving his friends from death. And next up, I gotta say, is a moment that really just made me cringe in the worst way. Tom Bombadil delivers a version of Gandalf's famous line about how many that live deserve death and some that die deserve life. And for the love of Pete, I can't put it any more plainly than to say this has to stop if this show is ever going to forge its own path. They keep putting in phrases and references, either from the books and films, or in some cases, just the films. And every time I can't help but think about the original context. I realize that moments like this are meant to remind us of those things, either to try for some connection or just to give us warm fuzzies associated with the original films, but this backfires for me every single time. And possibly the worst part, aside from it being a lazy nostalgia grab, is how often the true meaning of the lines or moments is undermined here. Take this very line. In the books in Bag End, in the films in Moria, where Gandalf teaches Frodo the lesson that he shouldn't be so quick to deal out death in judgment to Gollum. Here we have Tom Bombadil using the same line to essentially say, maybe you should let your friends die. Sure, this is totally Tom setting up the stranger to make the right choice, but it takes this iconic, impactful, deep lesson of mercy and turns it into something that's not even remotely close to that. You've got this opportunity to tell stories unique to this time period in Middle-earth, and things like Annatar and Celebrimbor and Khazad-dûm are really pulling their weight, and they just keep cutting the legs out from under the show by doing these callbacks to movies made by a completely different studio. I could go on this very topic for an entire video length going over the many references and how they nearly always backfire, but I'll leave it at this. In my opinion, we've seen so much genuine improvement in this show over the course of Season 2, and where it has forged its own compelling Middle-earth story. But so long as the writers continue to force in these references, it will continue to shoot itself in the foot, and remind people of how much better these very phrases are in their original depictions. Quite simply, they have to stop doing this. Anyway, the stranger says, hey, maybe I can save my friends and come back. And Tom is like, nope, can't do that. And he mysteriously disappears. And I gotta say real quick, while he delivered my least favorite line in the episode, I do think Rory Kinnear has been a solid choice for Tom Bombadil. He conveys a natural warmth that could have really easily been missed in an adaptation of the character. The moments where we see Tom's irreverence, which throws off the stranger, are when he feels most like his book counterpart for sure. We then transition to Khazad-dûm, and a real quick addendum to last week's episode. I was joking around about the elves using the doors of Durin as a table, and some folks pointed out that they were likely inlaying the doors with Ithildin, which I think is definitely what is happening here. I still think it's kinda odd to do a grand unveiling of a partially completed project, but at least this makes sense to me now. We see Khazad-dûm in full swing with dwarves mining all over, and as much as I mentioned Numenor and Eregion being offenders when it comes to feeling small, I think Khazad-dûm is the strongest counterpoint to that. We got some nice shots in Season 1 that indicated this was a bustling realm, And here we get another as the camera pans up on dwarves mining all over within the mountain. The king's throne room is bustling as wheelbarrows of gold are brought in and dumped in the king's hall. We then see Durin IV heading into the throne room, which has been cleared of the mounds of gold. Turns out he's been summoned not by the king, but by Annatar. After a brief exchange with the prince, Annatar shares that Eregion will soon be under attack, and that they need more mithril to finish the remaining rings. In exchange, Annatar offers timber for the expanding realm's mine shafts, but then drops a line saying maybe they desire something, dramatic pause, more precious. I'm not really sure what he might be referring to here, but my best guess is maybe more shiny gems and gold to go with Durin's growing collection. He's already got a ring of power and mines of mithril, so I'm not sure what they could offer that would blow him away here. Surprisingly, the king turns him down, and as Annatar glances to the side, he sees the Balrog appear in the flames of the brazier. Now, I've seen some folks guessing that this is Annatar somehow summoning the Balrog, and I don't think that's the case. I saw this being more an instance of Annatar sensing its presence and realizing the dwarves are on the verge of delving too deep. King Durin, it turns out, is holding out for a higher price for his mithril, realizing mithril armor and weapons could be the key to victory. Fun fact, some notable items throughout the history of Middle-earth made of mithril are obviously Bilbo's mithril shirt, but also things like the helmets of the guards of the Citadel in Minas Tirith, the Star of Elendil, an heirloom of his ancestors in Numenor, Earendil's ship Vingelot, and Nenya, Galadriel's Ring of Power. Interestingly, there are no known weapons made of the metal, though admittedly the Elves of Gondolin seem to have done just fine with their famous blades without using it. Durin says they're going to expand the dig even further, and his son challenges him to take off the ring, and we get this great exchange where the father says, "No, it belongs to me," and the son says, "No, you belong to it." As Durin IV tries to take the ring off by force, he gets thrown across the room, I guess because of added strength of the ring, perhaps. Now, I talked last week about how the abilities of the Dwarven rings differ from the books in terms of Durin's descent into madness here, but that aside, I gotta say Durin III kind of going mad and crazed with greed does give some really good drama within the Khazad-dûm storyline. Back in their home, Durin and Disa debate what to do about the king, and Disa drops the hint that the king was twice the father to her that her own father ever was. We don't get any more details on this particular bit, but I like that their conversation here flows quite logically, and it truly feels like a family wrestling with some tough choices. Just when I was thinking, dang, Disa sure is eager to overthrow him, we got Durin saying, "How can you talk about him like that?" And Disa's line about her own father and the big picture of the danger Khazad-dûm's people are in, it just felt like a really natural progression of a conversation here. This is immediately followed by one of my favorite moments of the episode, and one of the most tearjerker moments of the entire show so far. Durin breaks down as he says he can't overthrow the king because he looks at him and still sees his father. During my Season 1 review, I said that Durin IV is the beating heart of this show, and this scene just served as a reminder that he undoubtedly remains firmly in that position. Owain Arthur is really great in this scene, just like in Season 1 when he thought he was saying goodbye to Elrond for the last time. If there's a moment in this show that makes you teary-eyed, no doubt Durin IV is the one on screen. Back in Numenor, we see a group of 4 guards blowing horns. I couldn't really tell what the horns are designed to look like, but it seems there's some kind of open mouths at the end, possibly referencing the sea worm they are said to be summoning. We then cut to Eärien and Elendil in the dungeon, where she says Pharazon does not wish to further antagonize the faithful, and offers Elendil pardon in exchange for his loyalty. Elendil refuses and even goes so far as to tell his daughter that if all she sees in his actions is pride, then they have no words left to speak. This was one of those "oh dang" moments. Eärien says Pharazon said Elendil would say this, and that his hatred for Pharazon would shut his ears to Eärien. And I wonder if this might have been something Pharazon saw in the Palantir. At this point, we haven't seen what Pharazon saw now that he has the Palantir. Eärien brings in Miriel, who tries to talk Elendil into bowing to Pharazon, and I love this sequence. This is the kind of stuff I was hoping to get from Elendil as a character. And this scene and Lloyd Owen's performance really brought it here, with great lines like, "Faith is not faith if it is not lived," and "I would rather die with a heart that is whole than live with one broken by cowardice." These are just further examples of this uncompromising moral compass I talked about earlier. This is who Elendil is and should be, and I am so here for it. Back to Khazad-dûm, where Narvi is leading a team of dwarves carrying a battering ram, and I'd love to hear from any miners in the group if battering rams come in handy in mining. My best guess is maybe this is a nice lunch buffet they've got packed up for a break time. They meet Disa and threaten to remove her from their way by force, and Disa responds by doing some of her singing, which 6 bats on them. This was an odd one for me. Anyway, they know more dwarves will return soon and resolve to be ready for them, and we are right back to Numenor where the sea trial is about to begin. But just as Elendil is about to be thrown in, Miriel shows up saying that because Elendil's misdeeds were done in her name, she has the right to face judgment in his place. Eärien says it's written in the huge book Belzegar is still hauling around. She probably checked it out for a bit of light reading at some point, and Miriel is allowed to step in. Miriel calms Elendil, first saying Namarie, which as we discussed in Season 1, most commonly means farewell in Quenya, though it's worth noting its literal translation is be well, and can also be seen as blessing someone. She then says if they're going to walk the path of the faithful, it must be her that takes the first step. Now, clearly in the last couple scenes and in the previous episode, there have been hints at a possible Elendil-Miriel romance. And I gotta say, of all the insane romance hints and theories, or shipping, as the kids say, this is the one that feels both organic and actually makes a lick of sense to me. If you're wondering, no, there's no romance between Miriel and Elendil in the books, but this is one that I think works just fine, and doesn't feel like a betrayal to either character. Now, light book spoilers here, so skip ahead to this time code if you don't want to hear, but I think this also sets up an even more impactful ending to Miriel and Elendil's relationship in multiple ways. In the books, Miriel marries Pharazon, and the reasoning varies depending on the version of the tale. In most cases, and the most canon, she is forced into it, while in another she is all in favor of it and seems a bit evil herself. I think what we'll see is Miriel agree to marry Pharazon and give legitimacy to his rule in exchange for him promising not to harm the faithful or something to that effect. Back at the sea trial, Miriel gets pulled underwater from the smaller pool and we get the trailer shots of her with the giant sea creature. She gets spit out on the rocks and is pronounced innocent. Elendil leads the crowd in cheering on Tar Miriel. Again, Tar is the royal prefix of the rulers of Numenor. So in a way, Elendil is once again proclaiming her the rightful queen of Numenor by using this title. The crowd joins in to cheer her, and I just gotta point out again how fickle the Númenóreans seem. I'm really not sure if this relatively small gathering is supposed to be the same people who were throwing a ruckus earlier during Elendil's trial. Even earlier in the scene, it was kinda hard to tell if they were jeering her when she showed up at the trial to take Elendil's place, or if maybe this is a gathering of the faithful who didn't want to see the queen die. This sent me down a rabbit hole of way over-analyzing extras between the court scene and this one, and there doesn't appear to be any glaring overlap of characters. So I'm guessing this is supposed to be a gathering of the faithful. Still, I think this does kind of speak to the lack of clarity this division has been portrayed with so far. Someone casually viewing the show will just keep seeing gatherings of 30 to 50 Númenóreans cheering one way or the other, and I feel like it kinda just makes the Númenórean population seem really fickle and honestly kinda dumb, because it seems like they're just going back and forth on who they're cheering for. They really need to bring some clarity to these scenes and the situation as it stands in Numenor. That rabbit hole aside, I'm super digging the dynamics going forward with Elendil, Miriel, and Pharazon. I think hopefully in this season, but definitely by season 3, we should be getting a lot more from these characters and the power struggles and hopefully some cloak and dagger politicking at play. Next we see Pharazon once again with the Palantir, and this time we get to see glimpses of what he sees. First is the magma of Mount Doom, followed by Sauron's eye from the end of season 1, then Sauron as Halbrand turning around, which seems to be a shot from last season during his time in Numenor. Pharazon takes his hand off the Palantir out of breath, And what I find interesting here is that while Miriel and Elendil had full-on scenes play out when they looked into the Palantir, Pharazon's is these quick-cut visions, kind of like what we've seen with the Stranger. I wonder if because Pharazon isn't someone faithful, if the Seeing Stone doesn't work as well for him. As we've covered before, the Palantiri work a bit differently in the show, but I could see this being another added element that makes what is already a bit of guesswork to interpret these visions into something that leads Pharazon to make some really bad assumptions and decisions. He definitely looks super mad in this last shot, and the voiceover of Galadriel saying, "Halbrand is Sauron" from the next scene begins over top of Pharazon's final shot. So perhaps this is Pharazon realizing that the dude who visited their island was Sauron, and this will lead him to sail to Middle-earth seeking to defeat and ultimately capture the Dark Lord. As mentioned, Galadriel tells Adar that Halbrand is Sauron and that he is an Eregion. Galadriel seems to accept Adar's offer of an alliance, saying that once Elrond returns with an army of elves, they can get Nenya and together eradicate Sauron once and for all. She even goes so far as to finally call Adar by his preferred term of Uruk, which I should point out again, as with last season, is simply the Black speech word meaning orc. Adar asks if Gil-galad would then let the orcs go back to Mordor and leave them alone, but goes on to say that Galadriel revealed everything he hoped she would and more. So I don't know how interested he was in actually forming an alliance. Outside, Adar reveals that he has far more than a single legion of orcs as campfires alight below. Galadriel realizes this all must be what Sauron wants, guessing what was set up in the premiere with Sauron essentially getting Adar and the orcs to attack Eregion for him. Glug is the only one fazed by Galadriel's words. He's got a wife and kid at home after all. And Adar rips the horn out of his hands, blowing it, marking the beginning of the Siege of Eregion. Fun fact, in the books it takes 2 years from the time Sauron leads his army into Eriador to the conclusion of the Siege of Eregion. No doubt it'll be much more speedy over the next couple of episodes. The elves start freaking out as they see orcs on the shoreline prepping for the assault, and we see Annatar back in Eregion looking on. Now, we've mentioned the fast travel quite a bit over the past couple of seasons, and I thought this was a pretty noticeable case as well. Sauron was able to travel to Khazad-dûm and back between the orcs being right across the river at the end of last episode, and them finally starting the assault here. It was kinda nice for Adar to wait on him, honestly. According to the Atlas of Middle-earth, Austin Ethil to Khazad-dûm would be roughly 300 miles round trip. However, I think the show has the location of Austin Ethil, which is something we don't know with 100% certainty in the books, closer to Khazad-dûm. And this sent me down a total rabbit hole, but I think they actually tweaked it sometime between the original promo maps going out and now, as there is this earlier version where Austin Ethil is west of the river Bruinen, but the more recent version has it much closer to the Misty Mountains. I wanted to be thorough here, so I took the Eregion close-up map, overlaid it with the larger Middle-earth map released for the show, and used the distance scale on the map to determine that Moria and Khazad-dûm are 37.5 leagues apart as the eagle flies, meaning they are roughly 112.5 miles apart. So we can confidently say that each time we see characters like Annatar or Durin traveling between these realms, it's about 225 miles round trip. Geography nerd tangent aside, we see Annatar cut his own hand with a knife, then we are back inside where Celebrimbor is sketching out designs for the 9 rings. He hears some commotion and goes to look when Annatar pops up out of nowhere to ensure that he doesn't. They argue and Annatar threatens him, saying if he leaves his work, then every soul in the seen or unseen world will know that Celebrimbor was the architect of their demise. Now, I feel I've mentioned this in previous videos enough to not belabor the point here, but this is another line that kind of adds to my uncertainty over how the show views and is adapting the unseen world. The unseen has kind of been shorthand for a power source at times, and we've really only had an indication that Sauron also has a presence there, but none of the elves that also should. I'm just kind of hazy on the show's idea of the unseen thus far. Sauron closes his eyes, and we get this really cool scene as he creates this incredible vision for Celebrimbor, of elves just enjoying the courtyard, which seems to refresh the elven smith. Annatar steps out, saying he tried for centuries to do what he could not without Celebrimbor. He then gives Brimby a container of mithril ore ground down into a powder. And I wonder if him slicing his hand has something to do with him tainting this mithril ore. If there's a chance he'll end up running around during the siege, no doubt he needs to influence the 9 in some way as he did with the 7. No doubt there's probably some shady stuff going on with this mithril that he probably stole from Khazad-dûm. Annatar goes on to hype up Celebrimbor by saying the great silmarils will be little more than a footnote when the story of the age is written compared to the Rings of Power by Celebrimbor. He gives him Feanor's hammer to use in crafting the 9, and I really like this. And I was honestly hoping the hammer would come into play at some point. Using his grandfather's hammer to best his grandfather's work is pretty poetic stuff, and I like that Annatar is playing on Celebrimbor's ambition to live up to, and perhaps even surpassing, his grandfather. In an otherwise great scene, there was one moment that undermined it a bit for me. When Sauron says the rings will be deemed the most, dramatic pause, precious creations in all Middle-earth. This is nowhere near as bad of a reference in my mind as the earlier one that sent me on a rant tangent, but at this point it's like death by 1,000 cuts, where the minor references to the Lord of the Rings stick out because it happens so often. It's a classic case of prequelitis, and I really wish someone would step back and say, is this truly the best word for Annatar to use in this context? Or are we just working in this word because of what has come before? Let me know what you think about this in the comments, but personally, I think there's likely many other words that would serve the same function of convincing Celebrimbor to go on with the rings, and would better play off what we know drives his character. In previous episodes, he's clearly struggled with creating nothing near what Feanor had, with wanting to create something of real power, and talking about making the rings as his moment. Even words like marvelous, miraculous, wondrous, magnificent, incredible, astonishing, and glorious, just to name a few, in my mind, seem much more in line with things that would resonate with Celebrimbor. Anyway, Celebrimbor gets back to work, and we get this legit transition shot of sunshine and happy elves to darkness and people fleeing in terror. I love how Annatar just strolls through with his little smirk from the trailer, knowing he's got Celebrimbor back on the hook. His timing seems to be working out as he goes up and spreads his arms wide, and the camera travels across the river to the orcs launching their siege weapons. As fireballs descend into Eregion, we get one coming directly to camera and cut to black. The siege of Eregion has officially begun. All in all, I thought this was another pretty strong episode. Obviously, I think it has a couple pitfalls that I went into in a bit of detail here, but the Annatar Celebrimbor stuff continues to shine, and the Khazad-dûm story continues to bring heart into the show. I think both of these in particular are set up to potentially have some really great conclusions in these last 2 episodes. I'm absolutely loving the resolve we see in Elendil, and I'm eager to see more Numenor, though I also think it could benefit from some clarity in the overall vibe of the population. It feels very much like a pendulum right now, with a very small group of people going back and forth on which side they're on. Overall, I gotta say, I'm much more eager to watch next week's episode than I was during the run of Season 1, and I find myself theorizing a bit more where subsequent seasons might go, which I think is a testament to the fact that overall, Season 2 is an improvement. The question now is, how will the season close out? We've got a massive battle ahead and just 2 episodes left to see where it concludes. But enough of my rambling nerdiness, what did you think of this episode? Do you find yourself pulled out of the show by the references like me? Do you think my opinions are bonkers? Let me know in the comments. While Sauron may wow us with his illusions, you can wow guests in your realm with some awesome metal posters. And with displates, the process is incredibly easy. Each displate comes with a magnet kit, so not only can you hang your poster in seconds, but you can easily swap them out if you want to change things up. No need whatsoever for power tools or those dreaded wall anchors. The hardest part will be deciding which ones to order. Displates are printed in the European Union and have fast delivery, typically arriving within 4 to 5 business days. And right now they have their Collectors Fest event with special pricing on tons of great posters. And combined with my promo code NOTR, right now you can get 1 to 2 displates at 32% off or 37% off 3 or more. And be sure to check out their new Textra style for added dimension and cool factor from Displate.